Welcome, Black Hollywood Live fans. On today's Justice is Served, we talk the shooting deaths of Tyreek King and Terence Crutcher, and much, much more. Stay tuned.
You are tuned in to Black Hollywood Lives. Justice is served.
Welcome, Black Hollywood Live fans. I'm your host, Shaka Smith. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat at Shaka Strong. I'm joined here by my wonderful co-host, Yemi Abayomi.
Hi, good to see you guys. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at @ayemyems.
Well, we have quite a few stories to cover this week for you guys. Unfortunately, not too much good news to bring you, but I guess it's such is the case, on this show, Justice is Served. We actually have the shooting death of Tyreek King that happened a few weeks ago to talk about. So this was a 13-year-old who was shot by police, and they claimed that he had pulled a gun, and they found out the gun was a BB gun. What were your thoughts about this particular case?
Honestly, this case came up kind of shortly after or at least I learned of this case shortly after learning of the Terence Crutcher case. And to me, there's actually a big difference here because I actually do sympathize with an officer who sees something that looks like a gun. I saw kind of side-by-side images of what I think it was a Glock 9 looks like and what this BB gun looked like, and they were similar. And I do sympathize with officers because I do believe they are in high pressure situations, have to act quickly, and it's hard when you see someone maybe potentially reaching for something that looks so similar to a gun. But I think it's really unfortunate that we're having to talk about the loss of another young black life.
Yeah, and at 13, this case I did kind of find distinguishable because the gun did look very similar to what a real gun would look like. Apparently, there was a report made that there were some young males and one of them was armed, and the officers arrived on scene, and it looks like two of them ran away and the officers followed suit, and then one then pulled the gun. So I always do defer to the officer's decision in these sort of high-pressure situations. I think almost all reasonable people could agree that there was a degree by which the officer felt his life was in danger.
Yeah, I agree, and so I completely think they're distinguishable. The only kind of piece that I read that came into question was that I think I don't know whether there was an autopsy report, but something revealed that. Or the medical examiner suggested that he might have been running away at the time that he was shot, which for me, of course, raises the question, was the officer in a reasonable apprehension or fear for their life if your suspect is running away from you? And I know that various states differ in terms of when officers can use lethal force. So even if, perhaps a gun was present or what looked like a gun was present on the body of this young boy, is it really still justified to then shoot them when they're running away and potentially not aiming that gun at you?
Yeah, and we don't have, at least right now, body camera footage, so we don't have any conflicting stories or videos to assess on our own, as we did with Tamir Rice, where we had the conflicting stories, and that case was a little bit more egregious. And so at least there was no grand jury indictment, but there was a settlement for $6 million there with Tamir. So I guess we'll stay tuned for the Tyreek King case, so we'll kind of stay close to it and update the viewers.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how that one happens. I wonder whether would a settlement be forthcoming when there was this thing that looked like a gun, this BB gun that looked very similar.
And if we have any video footage that might come out from that incident. Yeah. Now we move on to the case of Terence Crutcher, and here I guess we do have some video evidence which seems to really not wash well for the police. So Terence Crutcher was recently killed. He was during a highway stop, and apparently his car had broken down. And I guess Officer Betty Shelby arrives on the scene, and she says that he was uncooperative, and that's why she radioed for backup. And at some point, we see his arms raised. He's walking towards the car. She says he reached for something in the car that she believed to be a gun, and that's when she shot. What I thought was interesting here was the officer that she radioed for backup, that arrived as backup, when he shot, he tasered. And so we have a difference of an assessment here. What do you think about this?
This case was so unfortunate because, as you said, it was not even a police stop, but it was literally just a car broken down on the side of a road, which suggests that an officer should approach that situation with, I guess, less concern or less fear or less kind of need to kind of go towards.
Their mindset should be different.
Yeah, when you meet someone who's just broken down on the side of the road, it's not that you're responding to a call of someone doing something. So this one was a tough one to watch. I mean, you have one officer who obviously thought it was appropriate to taser, another who shot. But what was interesting in this story was that you have the the people in the helicopter, the officers saying, that looks like a bad dude. Something looks wrong. What's he up to? Which again makes me question, what are these officers thinking? What's their mindset, and why?
And what is a bad dude from so far away? Well, what did he see that made him interpret it that way? Was it skin color alone,
Exactly. And then, of course, as we found out, there was no gun found in the car. And it was strange. I guess this Betty Shelby, she had recently Schultz had recently gone through kind of drug recognition training and had said, he was acting erratically, he's not complying with our commands, but everything appears to the contrary when you look at the video evidence, and it again raises the issue of how often is it happening that maybe situations where there isn't video.
Yeah.
Fortunately in this case we can see a video that conflicts with what the officers are saying, but it makes me wonder how many times this is happening when there isn't video present, and how many lives we're losing in that case too.
Yeah, and of course we don't have video to kind of back up Betty Shelby's claim, because her dash cam video never turned on because she didn't turn on her sirens. And so unfortunately we're missing that part of the video. But what do you think about her likelihood of being charged here? I mean, there's a strong call for her to be criminally charged.
I can only hope that at one point I'm always a little bit pessimistic about these things, because I feel like very rarely do I see officers getting convictions, even when the evidence looks very clear and the video footage seems to tell a certain story of an unarmed person, innocent person getting killed, and wanting to see someone held responsible for that. I think at this point, because there have been so many numbers and so many times when it hasn't happened, I'm a little bit pessimistic.
Well, I'm in terms of the criminal charges, I'm a little bit optimistic here, and I think it's going to turn on. So the other officer was Tyler Turnborough, and I think it's going to turn on the fact that he tasered and she didn't, because now you can say that we defer to their mindset during that particular situation, and one officer's mindset was this was not a situation in which you would shoot to kill, and so I think that given that gives the prosecution a little bit more leeway in saying that this officer really made the wrong decision here, and that was outside of that sort of reasonable assessment by a police officer.
I hope so. It seems that recently in April, I think an officer in the same district was recently convicted of manslaughter, where they mistook their stun gun for a handgun, and so that one was at least that there was an actual conviction in that same district. So who knows? Maybe anything's possible. And I know that there have been reports on this particular department showing that there is some evidence of corruption and poorly trained reserve officers. So even if there isn't a charge, hopefully they will use this to evaluate their practices going forward.
Absolutely, and we know that the DOJ has already opened an investigation. So we will certainly have updates for you guys on that in the coming weeks. And we have another case of another black individual shot, Keith Lamont Scott. And this happened in Charlotte, North Carolina, and as we know, this has sparked many riots in North Carolina. And interesting to note that it was his, I believe it's his widow that Facebook live streamed this, and so it's interesting to see that people are engaging in social media, because we've already had a couple of shootings that were Facebook live streamed, and we've seen different things shared on Twitter. So it looks like it's almost up to us as a community to be vigilant and share these things out with people.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see what happens come football Sunday. We've seen obviously lots of football players speaking out in protest against the killings of unarmed black men, and I'm curious to see are there going to be more who speak out, or maybe more who take a knee, or more who kind of want to continue raising this concern, because some of these players have gotten a lot of backlash for speaking out against these protests. But when you then see these visual images happening again and again and again, maybe it'll kind of sway people to the other side.
Yeah, and we know both candidates, Trump and Clinton, have addressed it. So, we keep talking about these shootings, but it's really time at this point to see some action, to see some proactive things done that prevent these shootings from happening in the future. And so hopefully with both candidates at least addressing it, this issue will be addressed in some shape, way, or form.
Right, and hopefully it's not just something that you're discussing during the campaign that kind of falls off once you're in office. But it's challenging. There's so many, and you can only hope. But I feel like given that there's been so many and we still haven't seen much change, Maybe I'm just being like too pessimistic today. Actually, I should be hopeful.
Yeah, I'm hoping the spotlight and the glare of the media certainly helps push these cases in the right direction.
I think that's true. I think that will help. I think, again, athletes taking a stand, I think that becomes a very, very prime time, like, visual thing that you see when you see every single Sunday. You're going to see it on the sidelines before the games, and it seems like maybe some basketball players are even going to, planning to do it in November. So I think the more and more it's just present, the more, something does need to get done. But you would think it's a bit common sense in terms of just having better relationships with the community, better training, but for some reason, we haven't seen that yet.
So, of course, we will have updates for you guys in the coming weeks on all these cases. We will take a moment right now to have a little message from our sponsor, General Assembly.
Well, so are you looking for a career in tech? Maybe business, data, design, or marketing?
Who in these days, right? I'm telling you.
Trying to get that promotion or raise? Absolutely. To excel in your career, you need 21st century training and skills. General Assembly is the largest and most respected school worldwide for people seeking to grow their talent and master the marketplace. Whether it's learning remotely online or in person at one of their beautiful campuses, you can join the 350,000 people who have already gotten the training needed to propel careers in tech and business.
It's like, sign up quick because everyone's going for it right now.
And we know that those are really critical industries, that can potentially be lucrative. Yeah. More than 2,500 companies worldwide hire General Assembly graduates, with 99% of graduates who participate in General Assembly's career services landing a new role in a field within 6 months of starting their job search, which I think is a pretty incredible statistic.
Absolutely. Jeez.
Take control of your talent and career now. Find out more at ga.co/geek. That's ga.co/geek. Enter the promo code GEEK, G-E-E-K, to save on your first class, workshop, or event. That's ga.co/geek.
Awesome. Thank you, General Assembly.
Code word GEEK. Don't forget that.
Very important. Just moving on to our next set of stories, a little bit lighter fare here, but still, not the best. But it looks like Nick Gordon has been found liable for the wrongful death of Bobbi Kristina, which, I think everyone probably knows that she was found unresponsive in a bathtub, very similar to her mom. And after a long kind of time in hospice, she eventually passed. And so they weren't able to rule it a homicide, but they did find that she died due to drug intoxication and immersion in water. What did you take away from this liability?
I thought this was what was interesting to me in this case was that he was found culpable, but not so much because all of the evidence pointed in that direction. It was really just because he didn't show up for his court appearances. So he missed his second hearing in a row, and at that point the judge entered a default judgment of guilt. And so for me, I would like to see someone, evidence presented, although it does seem that, he did have a history of physical violence against her, and people had witnessed that. So
yeah, so they're alleging that he had beaten her after, giving her coke after a coke binge and drinking, and that he was eventually the one that gave her the toxic cocktail that caused her to pass out. Yeah,
there were some really kind of salacious details that I hadn't been familiar with before, that he had previously even installed surveillance cameras in the home, was helping himself to her bank accounts, things like that, and that he came home after this drug-fueled binge, apparently reviewed the surveillance video and had reviewed some of her conversations, and that's what allegedly spurred the argument between them. And so, she was found with marks on her chest, which he claims were from compression doing CPR, but she was found with marks on her chest and a broken tooth or a hanging tooth, and then found underwater. So the facts don't look great for him.
And certainly, there's the presumption that the facts are true now because he didn't show up for court. And I wonder if he would have even had a pretty good case if he just shown up, because we know that the medical examiner was unable to rule whether it was a homicide or an accident.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, but I guess we'll never know. But certainly in the court of public opinion, based on what I've read, it makes me question whether he would be innocent. And I guess we don't need to really find that out now. he's responsible.
Yeah, I mean, and so right now, I guess the jury's going to go ahead and determine damages, which could be substantial. In a wrongful death suit, damages could include the how much the decedent could have earned in their lifetime, and given her status, who knows what that determination will take on. So, unfortunately for Nick Gordon, he's been found guilty, and we'll see what sort of liability he'll have monetarily coming up. Another case very similar in this vein was Jim Carrey. So Jim Carrey's girlfriend, Catriona White, committed suicide, and Catriona White's widower has now come out and sued Jim Carrey for wrongful death. I found this a little bit odd because, if you're married and he was the boyfriend. So what did you make of this? It seems like, was it Mark Burton is the widower here?
Yeah, this was an interesting case because as I was reading it, I was like, wait, the lady's married, her husband's making this claim, but this is Jim Carrey's her boyfriend who caused her death. Now, this one was a bit different for me because at least with the Bobbi Kristina case, you have a situation where there's an allegedly abusive boyfriend who has been abusive in front of people and was with you at the time you died, and there's some it's a bit blurrier there. In this case, Jim Carrey is essentially being blamed for this woman's own actions.
And so, if she committed suicide, what's the theory of the case here? How could he be culpable for wrongful death?
It's almost as though Mark Burton is claiming that it's kind of an enabler kind of case that he's proffering. I personally don't see it because he's saying that Jim Carrey provided her with drugs that she wouldn't have otherwise had access to. This lady, she died, and it was found that she had Ambien, Percocet, and propranolol.
Yeah.
in her system at the time that she died. And so his claim is that, well, you gave her access to these drugs that were obtained illegally in the first place, so you should have some sort of responsibility. So I don't know whether that comes in the form of kind of illegal distribution of drugs or I don't know. I personally don't see it.
Well, I take it the other way. I think certainly it did show, as they said, a reckless disregard of causing serious harm and injury. So we know that Jim Carrey, it seems, illegally obtained these prescriptions under a different name, Arthur King. And all the prescription bottles that were found when she committed suicide were Arthur King's bottles. So if you know someone is suicidal and you're providing them these pills that are illegally obtained, it seems to me that there's a strong case that you have a reckless disregard for causing serious injury or harm.
I don't know. I disagree. I feel like you can't say what this person is going to do. I mean, I will say. I mean, I agree with you to the extent that it seems as though this lady had a history of depression and she had previously attempted suicide before.
Which Jim Carrey would have known.
Possibly,
Yeah.
if they I guess if they were boyfriend and girlfriend and they were close, but who knows if she actually disclosed her past to him. But either way, I feel like you can't be sure. I just don't think you can blame another person for your actions.
I mean,
you took yourself. I mean, she voluntarily took those pills, and even if she had that history of depression or anxiety or those previous suicide attempts, who's to say that wasn't 20 years ago and she's now kind of clear and living free and happy?
I
Maybe
think
she just needed them to sleep.
I think she had a history. I think she had a history here, and given the amount, the different types, providing someone, I think, with sort of possibly depression, with suffering from depression, with Ambien, propranolol, and Percocet, and also all these under a false name, that to me speaks more to the reckless disregard.
Well, so I think those things speak to maybe the illegal distribution of drugs, and I think there's an avenue that way. But in terms of holding her responsible for this lady's death, whether it's like a homicide charge or a
wrongful death, just for a civil liability,
case, a wrongful death case, I don't see it. I think she's, to me, it's almost kind of akin to saying, here is like, even if I have a gun and maybe I didn't have that gun legally, and I need to store it in your home, and I know you have maybe a history of violence, but I just need to store this gun somewhere, and then this person takes this gun and whether shoots themselves, essentially. I mean,
but if I made the comment prior to you, if I had a gun, I would go do this, and then you try to store the gun, and I think that's more akin to that situation for me. So I think Jim Carrey could be on the hook here. But what I think is so
kind of like assisted suicide in a sense.
Well, in terms of wrongful death, because he had a reckless disregard for the harm and injury he was going to cause by providing those drugs, and he knew or should have known that was a possible outcome.
Well, I think there's going to be a big question as to did he know, and even still, would you necessarily know someone's kind of deep-seated history of like?
I think given the personal relationship between those two, I think Jim Carrey's going to be in a little trouble here. But we do know with wrongful death, which I found interesting, is one of the elements you can recover for is loss of consortium. So I don't know if he can get, if Mark Burton can get that, because were they separated? Were they divorcing? You know, the loss of affection. And so that'll be interesting. And then in terms of her earnings, what she might have made if she were to live, Jim Carrey came out and said, you know, this woman was troubled long before I met her, and you know, these were issues beyond any human's control. So that might speak to the fact that she may have committed suicide or harmed herself regardless. And I think that might reduce damages, but I think he'll still in this particular case, because he did provide those drugs, on the hook for wrongful death.
It actually reminded me of the Subway guy that we were discussing the other day, Jared Foley, who, you know, had sued one of the victims of who had claimed emotional distress.
Yeah.
But who was already, you know, he claimed, she was already kind of damaged and
yeah, so the idea is what is your contribution? And so do I think Jim Carrey, I don't think he'll pay as much in damages as one might pay if, you know, she had been just seemingly like going to be fine and not, you know, indicative of self-harm, but I do think he'll be found liable for the wrongful death.
I have to keep my position. I didn't think that Jared was going to be held responsible for contributory negligence, or, you know, held for
the parents would be. Yeah.
I didn't think that they would be held responsible, and I in the same case, I don't think Jim Carrey is going to have to be any responsible at all.
Well, we shall see, and we do know that they must know each other, because Mark Burton is also asking for funeral expenses, and Jim Carrey was a pallbearer at the funeral. So it's just an interesting case, and you know, I didn't even know Mark Burton existed until I read this article.
Well, so I think a lot of people do stuff like this. I think it's a frivolous case, and I think he's doing it to get his name in the. First off, in the papers, and to get money, and that's part of the reason why Jim Carrey is actually defending this suit, because he said I could have gone into a back room and just settled this case to get it out of the way and you know, have it be done with. But he said you have to stand up, and especially for what you believe in. And in this case, I don't feel like I did anything wrong.
Well, this is certainly interesting, and yeah, we will keep our listeners updated. Well, we have another live read from our great sponsor, Audible. You know, we all spend an ungodly amount of time on our daily commute, and the trouble is there's only so much justice served to help you pass the time. So when you find yourself on a gridlocked freeway, often in LA,
every day,
get lost in Audible audiobooks. Whether it's a mystery, thriller, memoir, or bestseller, Audible can turn your commute into another world. Just download your books or shows to your mobile device and listen while the carpoolers fly by. I know for me, I would love to learn another language. It would be great to listen to that as I was, you know, driving. With an unmatched selection of audiobooks, original audio shows, news, and comedy, Audible is your best source for traffic entertainment. The Audible app makes listening a breeze with features like chapter navigation and narration speed control. Awesome. You can even share your favorite audio excerpts with friends.
Wow. Hopefully after you've parked.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Not while you're on the road.
Yeah, no sharing and driving. Audible members have access to original audio shows, short stories, ad-free podcasts, news, comedy, and more. Are you listening to anything we should check out on Audible? Tweet me your suggestion and include #AudibleGNT. Join Audible today and explore the world's leading provider of audiobooks. Start a 30-day trial and download your first audiobook for free. That's pretty good.
Definitely.
Go to audible.com/GNT to get started. That's audible.com/GNT for a free 30-day trial and audiobook. Well, I think I could learn a language in 30 days. So.
Well, you can't beat a 30-day free trial. There's nothing to lose, definitely.
So thank you, Audible. We appreciate your support. And now, moving on to, I guess, you know, the prison system in this country. And so we have a lot of updates on that. But, you know, first up, Sandra Bland, where there's a little bit of justice being served in the Sandra Bland case. Why don't you explain a little bit about that?
So Sandra Bland was the lady who was essentially forcibly removed from her car. This is back in July of 2015 when she was pulled over, I think, for failing to signal. And there was a back and forth between her and the officer. And after that back and forth, he pulled her out of the car and kind of shoved her to the ground. And you could hear her in audio in the background saying, "You're hurting me, my arm hurts, why are you being so aggressive towards me?" Ultimately, she was arrested and taken to the county jail, where she died 3 days later. Or she committed suicide.
under suspicious circumstances.
So,
we must.
she was found hanging, I believe, in her cell, and so they said it was suicide. But her friends and family said this was unusual because she was a happy.
I think she had just started a job.
Yeah, she was on her way, I think, moving to start that new job. So people thought that was a bit suspicious, and so they have reached a settlement where the Texas Department of Public Safety and the Waller County Jail have been held liable for $1.9 million, and so the Texas Department is responsible for $100,000 of that, and the Waller County Jail will be responsible for $1.8 million.
Yeah, because you do have an obligation, even if someone's a prisoner, regardless of fault, guilt, or whatever, to keep them safe. Mm-hmm. And so, and whether or not that's safe from self-harm or any other thing that might happen. So at least a little bit of justice there in this case.
A little bit. I mean, I think those types of things, it never compensates for the loss of the person.
Absolutely. And again, we have Terrell Thomas. And so this was actually, this case was the one that really upset me a lot, because this guy died of dehydration. He was in custody for 9 days and was unable to get water. Apparently the water in his cell was off for 6 days, and it was something the officials were aware of. They heard this guy every day asking for water. What did you make of this?
I thought this was absolutely terrible and egregious, and it goes to your point of what you were saying about when you have someone in your custody where they simply cannot leave, you're under a reasonable duty of care for them. Mm-hmm. And that means whether it's feeding them, whether it's, providing water, I mean, these basic human needs, you need to be responsible for that. And so to shut the water off for 6 days, to me, is unconscionable. And this isn't the first time that this has happened. Back in 2011, an inmate died at the same jail who had also had their water shut off. And apparently inmates had warned the staff there, like, if something happens to this guy, you're going to be responsible for it. So they knew that, this guy was in need of water and that he was thirsty. But apparently this isn't anything new. They've cut off water for inmates before. And as I said, now this is another death that has resulted from it. And
at least here, this was ruled a homicide. So I think this will make it easier to establish liability in this particular case.
And what surprised me is there's the number of deaths that also take place in prisons. We've had 800 deaths in prisons in the past year, and 182 of those deaths have taken place within 3 days of them landing in jail, which makes me wonder what's happening that so quickly such a large percentage are dying.
It's ridiculous. It's like we have some idea that our prison population aren't people and not humans that we're supposed to be taken care of as well. Because someone transgresses against the law and is maybe given up certain rights doesn't mean they forfeit their right to life.
Exactly, and it's unfortunate because they are removed from society in these prisons that not many of us, other than maybe family members or friends, are visiting, and so it's kind of like this separate world that might not be getting the attention that they need, because typically when we're talking about raising awareness about issues, it's people who are on the outside who can speak to media, do interviews, write articles, things like that, to raise awareness of an issue. But the prison population is at a particular disadvantage because they're so removed, and their communication is really limited by the institution.
And speaking of that limitation, I was surprised to learn that in 24 states, there were 40 to 50 prisons participating in a prison strike. And it's something you would never know because they don't have that same access to media. So these prisoners have been striking against harsher the three strikes law, and particularly against working for what are pennies, really. So that's one of the big issues they're attacking, is the fact that they are essentially slave labor in prison. What did you think about the fact that this is happening across so many states and we don't even know about this?
I thought this was great, and I have to too plead ignorance about it. I had no clue that, first off, I didn't even know that it was even allowed to kind of have people working for free. I mean, involuntary servitude is not legal under the 13th Amendment,
except for the carve-out.
And I've learned that there is a carve-out for people who have been convicted of crimes. In that case, they are able to, I guess, make them work for free and essentially work as slaves. And so that's what these prisoners are doing. And there's been an increasing trend over the course of the past few years, as you mentioned, against three strikes laws, the lack of educational services in prison systems, medical neglect, overcrowding, and the big one being prison labor, which is a very, very large industry. I think it's about a $2 billion industry that they make off of prison labor. So I thought it was great that they're able to organize, especially given how difficult it is to organize inside the prison system.
And especially without knowing what other prisons are doing, though, it looks like they had some idea that everyone was trying to do this at the same time. And it looks like they even went from hunger strikes as well to not showing up for work to kind of strike this issue. But it looks like after a week, there are still 11 states and 20 prisons still participating in this.
And possibly up to 20,000 prisoners.
Yeah, so this is big in terms of the momentum, but again, I don't think the word is getting out.
That's the thing. I mean, unless it's shows like ours who are trying to bring light to these types of issues. And again, I think a lot of these prisoners are going to have to rely on the support of media like us, their friends, their families, to get this message out there. And it might take some time, but I think it's great that, within the week that they do have so many prisoners across so many states. I mean, that's a significant number of states that people are organizing these protests through. And it's difficult, but they're using, whether it's smuggling cell phones or, trying to get the word out via family members or via social media. They are really focused on having their message heard.
Yeah, and I think it's an issue that should be looked into, though I myself have conflicting views on the issue. Because a lot of the jobs that they're doing are to kind of take care of themselves, whether it's cooking for the prison population. And so in jobs like that, I almost feel like maybe there should be no compensation because you did, commit a crime, and that's why you're there.
I understand your point. I don't entirely agree. I think you should be getting some sort of benefit. Again, you have nothing when you're in jail, and I think I'm not sure of how the prison system works, but I believe that in terms of even being able to go to the commissary and buy certain things, you have to make some sort of earning. And the way that they earn is via, these jobs that they do. So I think I'd be interested to know what their compensation is for doing these jobs and what the prices are like at the commissary. Are they equivalent? So, for example, if I'm earning 2 cents an hour, which is what some of these inmates are earning, some are earning nothing. Does that mean I can go to the commissary and get a meal for 2 cents? Is it equivalent like that? I think that's an important factor.
Yeah, I think it's something that definitely should be examined because you also want people to lower the rates of people committing crimes again when they come out. And I think having been able to earn some money so that they had some money to do something with after they're let out would also kind of reduce that. So I think it's an issue to be looked into, but at the same time, I'm a little bit on the fence.
Yeah, as I said, I mean, I think part of even being able to enter the workforce, that you want people to kind of take pride in the work that they're doing, and part of that comes with giving adequate compensation for it. And maybe again, it's what we were saying about treating people as humans. Just because they're in prison doesn't make them any less human. So much in the same way that in my regular day of life, if I go to work, I'm going to perform better and do better if I know I'm being adequately compensated for that. And it's probably the same in the prison system, that I'm going to take more pride in it and maybe put more effort in it if I know that I'm earning every dollar I get. So I think that's something to think about. But what I also understand, though, is that, prisons are trying to kind of clamp down on these acts of protest and are kind of circling up the prison leaders and sometimes putting them in solitary confinement or limiting their communication. And in some instances, some of these prisons have even gone on lockdown. So,
and unfortunately, that's the reason we're not hearing much about these different stories. But we here at Justice is Served will certainly pay attention and keep the listeners updated. Well, that's it for our stories this week. We want to thank you guys for joining us. As always, my name is Shaka Smith. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat at Shaka Strong.
Hi, I'm Yemi Abayomi, and you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at @ayemyems.
Yes, and please download us on iTunes, give us 5 stars, give us comments at YouTube. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thank you, guys.
From executives Keven Undergaro, Dario Kristen, Tiana Hobson, and the entire BHL staff, we would like to thank you for supporting Black Hollywood Live, the first online broadcast network dedicated to African-American entertainment. For questions and comments, contact us. info@blackhollywoodlive.com. Like us on Facebook, tweet us, or Instagram us at BHL Online. And I am the official voice of Black Hollywood Live, Scipio. Instagram me @KingXOBay. Thanks for tuning in.
Hollywood Redefined.
The views expressed here are those of the host only and do not necessarily reflect the views of BHL or its owners or principals.